The moment his hand closed around my wrist, the entire room went silent. I did not know his name 10 seconds earlier. I had come to that party as a stranger, standing near the back wall with a glass of water I never intended to drink, hoping nobody would notice me. Then a man in a dark suit crossed the floor without asking, without smiling, and pulled me down onto his lap in front of 200 guests. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the music seemed to fade, though I am certain it never actually stopped. My name is Clara Whitfield, and until that night, my life had been ordinary in every way that mattered. I worked at a small accounting office 3 streets from my apartment. I paid my bills late sometimes. I argued with my landlord about the heating. I had never, not once, imagined myself inside a mansion filled with men who wore silence like armor, and women who watched every movement with sharp, careful eyes. I had only come because my brother asked me to. Peter had a debt. He would not tell me the full amount, only that a man named Damien Ashford held the paper on it, and that if someone from our family did not show their face at this party, things would get worse for him very quickly. I did not understand what that meant at the time. I understood it perfectly an hour later. The house belonged to Damien. That much I gathered from the whispers around me before he ever appeared. It sat on a hill outside the city, surrounded by black iron gates and men who did not smile when they opened them. Inside, the ceilings rose high enough to swallow sound, and chandeliers threw gold light over marble floors polished to a mirror shine. I had worn the only dress I owned that seemed appropriate, a plain navy one that suddenly felt painfully out of place among silk and diamonds. I tried to stay invisible. I drifted along the edges of the room, watching faces I did not recognize, listening to conversations I did not understand. People spoke in careful sentences, as if every word might be repeated to someone dangerous later. I caught pieces of names, business deals, warnings dressed up as pleasantries. I understood none of it, and all of it at once. Then the room shifted. I felt it before I saw it, a change in the air, the way a crowd tightens when something important enters. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Heads turned toward the top of the staircase. I turned too, out of instinct more than curiosity, and saw him for the first time. Damien Ashford did not look like what I expected. I had built an image in my mind of someone loud, someone who announced his power with volume and threat. Instead, he moved with unhurried calm, descending the stairs like the party existed for no other reason than to wait for him. He wore black, plain and expensive, and his expression gave away nothing at all. Yet every person in that room adjusted themselves slightly as he passed, straightening, quieting, watching him from the corners of their eyes without daring to stare directly. I told myself I would not be one of those people. I told myself I would finish my glass of water, find my brother, and leave before anyone noticed I existed. I was wrong within minutes. He crossed the room with the same unhurried pace, greeting no one, stopping for no one, until he was standing directly in front of me. Up close, his eyes were a shade of gray I had never seen before, cold in color, but strangely alive, as though calculating something I could not guess. He studied my face the way a man studies a document he intends to memorize. "You are Peter Whitfield's sister," he said. It was not a question. My mouth went dry. Yes. He said nothing else. He simply reached out, took my wrist in a grip that was firm but not painful, and pulled me down onto his lap as he sat in a chair that had appeared, as if summoned, at the edge of the room. The gasp that spread through the crowd was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was silent, a collective intake of breath followed by absolute stillness, as if every guest had simultaneously decided that breathing too loudly might draw his attention. I sat frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs, acutely aware of every eye in the room fixed on us. I did not know what to do with my hands. I did not know where to look. I stared straight ahead at nothing, praying for the floor to open beneath me. "Smile," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. "They are watching to see if you are afraid." "I am afraid," I whispered back. "Then do not let them see it." I do not know where the courage came from, but I lifted my chin slightly and forced my expression into something calmer than I felt. Around the room, I noticed people exchanging glances, quick and nervous, as though recalculating something about me in real time. A woman near the bar leaned toward her companion, and whispered something behind her hand. A man by the window watched us with an expression I could not read, something between curiosity and concern. "Why did you do that?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Because your brother owes me a debt he cannot pay," Damien said, "and I needed everyone in this room to understand that you belong to me now, whether you like it or not." The words landed like ice water down my spine. I do not belong to anyone. For the first time, something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but close enough to unsettle me further. That is not what the room believes anymore. I wanted to stand, to walk away, to prove to myself and everyone watching that I was not some object to be claimed in front of an audience. But his arm rested lightly across my back, not trapping me exactly, but making it clear that leaving now would draw far more attention than staying. "What does my brother owe you?" I asked. "More than money," he said. "Enough that I could ruin him with a single phone call. Enough that I could ruin him with a single phone call. Enough that I could ruin him with a single phone call. Enough that I could ruin him with a single phone call." My stomach turned cold. "It is a fact," he said. "There is a difference, though most people never learn it in time." I studied his face, searching for any sign of cruelty, any confirmation that he was simply a dangerous man, enjoying a moment of power over a frightened stranger. What I found instead was something more complicated, a stillness that felt deliberate, calculated, as though every word he spoke had been chosen with precision rather than emotion. Across the room, I noticed a tall man with sharp features watching us with unusual intensity. Unlike the others, he did not look away when I caught his eye. He held my gaze for a long moment before turning to speak quietly to the man beside him. Something about the exchange made the back of my neck prickle with unease. "Who is that?" I asked Damien, tilting my head slightly toward the man. Damien's eyes flicked briefly in that direction before returning to me. "Victor Lang," he said, "a man who would very much enjoy seeing me fail tonight." "Why would pulling me onto your lap make you fail?" "It would not," Damien said. "It does the opposite. It tells him, and everyone else in this room, that I have already taken something he wanted before he could reach for it." I felt suddenly, sharply, like a piece on a board I could not see the shape of. "You used me. I protected you," he said, "and myself, at the same time." Sometimes those two things look identical from the outside. A young woman with copper hair and a nervous smile approached us before I could gather my thoughts further. She introduced herself quickly as Nora, one of the few guests who seemed willing to look at me directly, rather than study me from a safe distance. "You are very brave," Nora said, though her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Or, very unlucky. I have not decided which yet." "I did not choose this," I told her. "Nobody chooses anything in this house," Nora said. "Not really. Mr. Ashford chooses, and the rest of us adjust." She glanced nervously toward Damien, then back at me, before excusing herself and disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she had appeared. I watched her go, wondering how many other people in that room had learned to survive by simply staying small, by never drawing attention, by letting Damien make every decision that mattered. It frightened me more than any direct threat could have, the idea that fear here was not loud or dramatic, but quiet and constant, woven into every polite smile and careful word. A server passed with a tray of drinks, and Damien waved him away without looking, as if the man were furniture rather than a person. I noticed the server's hands shook slightly as he retreated, and I wondered how many small moments like that happened in this house every single day, invisible to anyone who was not paying attention. "They are all afraid of you," I said quietly. "Fear keeps people honest," Damien replied. "Trust me, most of them prefer it to the alternative." "What alternative?" "A world where they cannot predict what I will do next," he said. "Fear, at least, gives them rules to follow." I did not know how to respond to that. It was the kind of logic that made a terrible kind of sense the longer I sat with it, and that frightened me almost as much as the party itself. The music resumed at some point, though I could not say exactly when. Conversations slowly returned to their normal volume, though every so often I caught someone glancing our way, recalculating whatever story they were building about the woman sitting on Damien Ashford's lap. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand what my brother had done, what danger he had pulled me into, and why a man like Damien would choose such a public, deliberate display instead of a quiet conversation in a private room. But something in his expression told me this was not the moment for those questions. Not with Victor Lang still watching from across the room, not with dozens of curious eyes cataloging every detail of this strange, sudden claim. "You will come with me when this party ends," Damien said. It was not a request. "And if I refuse?" "You will not refuse," he said, "because you still do not know how much danger your brother is truly in, and until you do, refusing me would be the worst mistake you could make tonight." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something about the certainty in his voice silenced me more effectively than any threat could have. I looked past him, toward the crowd still watching, toward Victor Lang still standing near the window with his unreadable expression, and understood, for the first time, that I had walked into something far larger than a simple party. Whatever this was, it had already begun the moment his hand closed around my wrist. There would be no undoing it now. I sat very still on his lap, surrounded by strangers who feared him, in a house that felt more like a fortress than a home, and realized with a slow, sinking certainty that my ordinary life had ended the second I walked through those black iron gates. The only question left was, what kind of life would take its place? The car that took me away from the party was black, silent, and far too comfortable for a woman being taken somewhere against her will. I sat pressed against the door, as far from Damien as the seat allowed, watching the city lights blur past the window. He said nothing during the drive, his attention fixed on his phone, scrolling through messages I could not see. The silence between us felt heavier than any conversation could have been. We arrived at a townhouse in a quiet, expensive part of the city, far removed from the mansion where the party had taken place. Two men in dark coats opened the doors before we even reached them, nodding to Damien without a word, watching me with the same careful neutrality I had seen on every face that night. "This is not my apartment," I said as we stepped inside. "No," Damien agreed. "It is safer than your apartment." "Safer for who?" "For you," he said, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Victor Lang knows your address already. He knew it before tonight. If I had let you go home after that party, you would not have made it through the front door before someone was waiting for you." My chest tightened. "You are trying to frighten me." "I am trying to keep you alive," he said. "There is a difference, though I understand you may not see it that way yet." He led me into a sitting room with tall windows and warm lighting, nothing like the cold, echoing halls of the mansion. A fire burned low in the fireplace, and for a strange moment, the space felt almost normal, almost safe, before I reminded myself exactly whose house I was standing in. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "You have questions. I will answer some of them." I sat, arms crossed, refusing to let my fear show on my face the way he had instructed me to hide it earlier that night. "Start with my brother." Damien poured himself a drink before answering, taking his time in a way that made my patience fray further with every passing second. "Peter came to me 8 months ago, asking for a loan to save a business that was already failing before he ever walked through my door. I gave him the money because he swore he could repay it within a year. And he could not? He lost most of it within 3 months, gambling in places he should never have gone near, trying to win back what he had already spent recklessly." Damien's voice remained flat, almost bored, as though recounting a transaction rather than a betrayal. When I asked for repayment, he offered excuses instead of money. When I asked again, he disappeared for 2 weeks. When he finally resurfaced, he offered me something else instead. My stomach dropped. What did he offer? "You," Damien said simply. He told me his sister was intelligent, reliable, and far more valuable to me than the money he owed. He suggested I might find a use for you, in exchange for forgiving his debt entirely. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. "That is not possible. Peter would never do that." "I have the message on my phone if you would like to see it," Damien said, no trace of cruelty in his voice, only a terrible, patient honesty. He was quite specific about your qualifications. I felt sick. Betrayal settled into my stomach like a stone, heavy and cold, made worse by the calm, matter-of-fact way Damien delivered it, as though he were simply informing me of the weather rather than the collapse of everything I believed about my own family. "Why bring me to the party then?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. "Why not simply take whatever arrangement my brother offered you in private?" "Because Victor Lang has been waiting for an opportunity to move against me for over a year," Damien said. "He learned about Peter's debt before I did anything with the information. He intended to use you, Clara, as leverage against me, forcing your brother to hand you over to him instead, promising to erase the debt in exchange for access to you." "Access to me," I repeated numbly. "Victor collects things that belong to his enemies," Damien said, his tone darkening slightly for the first time that night. "Not always for pleasant reasons, sometimes simply to prove he can. I could not allow that to happen." "So you claimed me first," I said, understanding beginning to dawn through the fog of shock. "In front of everyone, so he could not." "Exactly," Damien said. "A public claim is difficult to challenge without starting a war. Neither side wants yet. By pulling you onto my lap tonight, I told every person in that room, including Victor, that you belong under my protection, not his. It was the fastest way to keep you safe." "You could have simply told me this quietly," I said. "You did not need an audience." "An audience was the entire point," Damien said. "Words are cheap in my world, Clara. Everyone lies. Everyone makes promises they never intend to keep. A gesture like that, in front of 200 witnesses, cannot be denied or reversed later. It is a message written in a language men like Victor actually understand." I sat with that for a long moment, turning the pieces over in my mind, trying to decide whether I believed him. Everything about the night had been engineered, calculated down to the smallest detail, yet somewhere beneath the calculation, I sensed something that felt almost like genuine concern, buried deep beneath layers of control and strategy. "What happens to me now?" I asked quietly. "You stay here, where I can protect you, until this situation with Victor resolves itself," Damien said. "You do not go to work. You do not go home. You do not contact your brother without my knowledge. You cannot simply lock me away from my own life." "I am not locking you away," Damien said. "I am keeping you breathing. There is a significant difference, and I would ask you to remember it before you decide to test the boundaries I am setting." Anger flared through my fear, hot and sudden. "You do not get to make decisions about my entire life because my brother made a terrible mistake." "No," Damien agreed, setting his glass down with quiet precision. "I do not get to make decisions about your entire life. I get to make decisions about the next several weeks, until Victor Lang either backs down or forces a confrontation neither of us can avoid. After that, Clara, your life is entirely your own again. And if I try to leave before then I cannot guarantee what happens to you," he said, "and I suspect, deep down, you already understand that." I hated that he was right. I hated that beneath my anger, a colder, more practical part of me recognized the truth in his warning. Victor Lang's face flickered through my memory, the sharp, unreadable expression he had worn while watching us across the room, the way he had turned to whisper to someone beside him the moment our eyes met. "Why should I trust anything you tell me?" I asked. "You are a stranger who kidnapped me from a party." "I did not kidnap you," Damien said. "I removed you from immediate danger and brought you somewhere safe. Whether you trust me or not is irrelevant to your safety, at least for tonight." A woman entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with tea and a small plate of food, setting it on the table beside me without a word, before retreating just as silently. I recognized something familiar in her careful movements, the same practiced quietness I had noticed in the servers at the party, people who had learned to exist without drawing attention in a house ruled by a man like Damien. "Her name is Iris," Damien said, noticing my gaze follow the woman as she left. "She will bring you anything you need while you are here. You are not a prisoner, Clara, whatever you may believe right now." "It certainly feels like it." "Feelings are not always accurate," he said. "You are free to move through this house as you wish. You simply cannot leave the grounds without my knowledge, for your own protection." I studied him carefully, searching again for the cruelty I expected to find, the coldness that should have accompanied a man capable of ruining lives with a single phone call. Instead, I found only calm, controlled patience, the same stillness that had unsettled me the moment he first appeared at the top of the staircase. "What did you mean earlier?" I asked, when you said fear gives people rules to follow. Something shifted briefly in his expression. A flicker of surprise, perhaps, that I had circled back to the comment at all. I meant exactly what I said. In my world, uncertainty kills people faster than violence ever does. Fear, properly managed, creates predictability. Predictability keeps people alive. That sounds like a very lonely way to live, I said quietly. For a moment, something in his eyes softened, so briefly I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. It is the only way I know how to live, Clara. I stopped searching for another one a long time ago. I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing at all for a long moment. Instead, I looked around the room properly for the first time, noticing details I had missed in the shock of arriving. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books that looked read rather than decorative, their spines worn soft at the edges. A chess set sat on a small table near the window, one game left unfinished, pieces scattered as though interrupted mid-thought. "Do you play?" I asked, nodding toward the board. "Every evening," Damien said. "Against myself, mostly. It helps me think through problems that do not have obvious answers. And Victor Lang," I said carefully, "is one of those problems?" "Victor has been a problem for longer than you have been aware of his existence," Damien said. "He inherited his position from his father, a man far more careful and far less reckless than his son. Victor wants territory I control. He wants respect he has not earned. Mostly, he wants an excuse to move against me without appearing to start the conflict himself. And I gave him that excuse just by existing." "You gave me a way to close that excuse before he could use it," Damien corrected. "There is a difference, though I understand it may not feel that way tonight." A phone buzzed somewhere across the room, and Damien rose to answer it, stepping just outside the doorway for privacy. I caught only fragments of the conversation, low and clipped, his voice carrying an authority that made even the servers in the hallway straighten slightly as they passed. When he returned, his expression had hardened almost imperceptibly. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Victor requested a meeting tomorrow," Damien said. "He wants to discuss what happened at the party tonight, formally, with witnesses present from both sides." "What does that mean for me?" "It means he intends to challenge my claim on you directly," Damien said. "He will likely argue that a public gesture, however dramatic, does not constitute a legitimate arrangement without your brother's explicit agreement." "My brother already agreed," I said bitterly. "He offered me to you himself." "Victor does not know that," Damien said, "and I have no intention of telling him, because it would place Peter in far greater danger than he currently faces. As far as Victor knows, I claimed you spontaneously tonight, out of personal interest rather than any prior arrangement." I absorbed that slowly, understanding the layers of protection Damien had quietly constructed around my brother, even after learning what Peter had tried to do. Why protect him at all, after what he offered you? Because harming your brother would only draw more attention to this situation, and attention is precisely what I am trying to avoid, Damien said. "Also," he added, more quietly, "because I suspect it would hurt you more than it would satisfy me." Something in his voice made me look up sharply, searching his face for meaning I could not quite name. He held my gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying whatever I thought I had heard beneath his words. "I need to call Peter," I said suddenly. "He needs to know I am safe. He needs to know what he has done." "Not tonight," Damien said firmly. "Any contact with your brother right now could be traced, monitored, or used against either of you. Victor has people watching Peter's apartment as we speak, waiting to see how he reacts to what happened at the party." "So I cannot even tell my own brother that I am alive?" "You can," Damien said, "once tomorrow's meeting concludes, and I understand exactly how much danger remains. Until then, patience will serve you far better than urgency." I wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was beginning to settle over me, heavy and undeniable, the adrenaline of the party finally draining away and leaving something hollow and tired in its place. Damien seemed to notice the shift in me almost immediately. "Iris will show you to a room upstairs," he said, rising from his chair. "You should rest. Tomorrow will require more from you than tonight did." "What do you mean?" "Victor will want to see you in person," Damien said. He will want to judge for himself whether you are simply a frightened woman he can pressure into cooperation, or something more difficult to move against. Which one am I? I asked quietly. For the first time since the party, something close to a genuine smile touched the corner of his mouth. That, Clara, is entirely up to you. Outside, the city continued its distant hum of traffic and life, indifferent to the strange, fragile truce forming quietly between us inside that warm, firelit room. Whatever waited for me beyond these walls, I understood now that returning to my old life would not be simple, even if Victor Lang disappeared entirely from the picture. My brother's betrayal alone had already changed everything I believed about safety and family, and the man sitting across from me, calm and unreadable, held more power over my next few weeks than anyone I had ever known. I picked up the cup of tea Iris had left, if only to give my hands something steady to hold, and wondered, with quiet dread, exactly how much more my ordinary life still had left to lose before this was finally over. The knock on my door came before sunrise, sharp and deliberate, pulling me out of a sleep I had not expected to find at all. Clara, Iris's voice, quiet but urgent, carried through the wood. Mr. Ashford needs you downstairs. Now. I dressed quickly in clothes that had appeared in the closet overnight, simple but expensive, clearly chosen by someone who had studied my size without ever asking. When I reached the sitting room, the warmth of the previous night had vanished entirely. Damien stood by the window, tension radiating from every line of his posture, his phone gripped tightly in one hand. What happened? I asked. Victor moved the meeting up, Damien said without turning. He is here now, 2 hours earlier than agreed, with more men than we discussed. My pulse quickened. That is not allowed? It is not customary, Damien said, which means he is testing how quickly I can adapt, or hoping to catch me unprepared. He finally turned to face me, his eyes sharper than I had seen them, cataloging my appearance with quick, assessing precision. When we go downstairs, say as little as possible. Let me speak. Whatever Victor says to provoke you, do not react. I can handle myself, I said, though my voice trembled slightly with the admission. I do not doubt that, Damien said, but Victor is skilled at finding weakness in silence as easily as in words. The less he learns about you today, the safer you remain. We descended together into a large reception room I had not seen the previous night, sparse and formal, clearly designed for exactly this kind of confrontation. Victor Lang stood near the center of the room, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, his sharp features arranged into an expression of polite, dangerous amusement. Damien, Victor said, his voice smooth and unhurried. Thank you for accommodating my early arrival. You did not ask permission, Victor, Damien said evenly. You simply arrived. A small oversight, Victor said, though nothing about his tone suggested genuine apology. His gaze shifted to me, sliding over my face and posture with a slow, deliberate thoroughness that made my skin crawl. And this must be the woman causing so much conversation this morning. Clara Whitfield, Damien said, before I could speak myself. Under my protection, as of last night. So I heard, Victor said, stepping closer despite the visible tension rippling through Damien's men, positioned along the walls. A rather dramatic display, pulling her onto your lap in front of half the city's business partners. Almost desperate, if I am being honest. I do not require your opinion on my methods, Damien said. No, Victor agreed, but I do require clarity on your intentions, given that this young woman's brother approached my associates with an entirely different arrangement several weeks ago. The room seemed to still around us. I felt Damien's posture shift almost imperceptibly beside me, a warning I understood without needing words. Peter Whitfield's debt belongs to me, Damien said. Whatever conversations he may have attempted elsewhere hold no weight. Perhaps, Victor said, his eyes returning to me with unsettling patience. Or perhaps his sister simply prefers a different arrangement than the one you have decided for her. He addressed me directly for the first time, his voice softening into something almost gentle, almost convincing. Clara, has anyone actually asked you what you want in this situation? Or has it simply been decided for you, the way men in this world tend to decide everything? I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, waiting, calculating. I thought of Damien's warning, his instruction to remain silent, to let him navigate whatever traps Victor intended to lay. But something about the deliberate gentleness in Victor's voice, the way he framed himself as somehow more considerate while surrounded by armed men in a room designed to intimidate, sparked a stubborn defiance I could not entirely suppress. "No one has asked me," I said carefully, choosing each word with deliberate precision, "because no one needed to. I am not confused about who created this situation, Mr. Lang. My brother's debt, your interest in using me as leverage against a rival, and this performance you are staging right now, all of it began long before I had any say in the matter." Victor's expression flickered, surprise breaking briefly through his composed mask. "I only wish to ensure you are not being coerced. I am surrounded by men from two different organizations, in a room clearly designed to project power rather than comfort," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "If concern for my well-being were genuinely your priority, this conversation would not be happening in front of an audience." A tense silence followed my words, broken only by the faint sound of Damien shifting slightly beside me, though I could not tell if his reaction was approval or alarm. Victor recovered quickly, his smile returning, though something colder had entered his eyes. "She has spirit," Victor said, addressing Damien now instead of me. "I can see why you chose such a public claim. Spirit like that tends to attract attention, regardless of who holds the paperwork on her brother's debts." "The conversation is finished, Victor," Damien said, his voice hardening. "Clara remains under my protection. Peter's debt remains mine to collect. Whatever arrangement you believe was offered to your associates carries no legitimacy without my agreement, and I have not given it." Victor studied Damien for a long moment, something calculating passing behind his eyes. "You understand this will not simply end because you have decided it should," he said. "I have invested considerable resources into this situation already. Walking away empty-handed is not something my associates will easily accept." "That is unfortunate for your associates," Damien said, "but it does not change my answer." Victor's gaze returned to me one final time, lingering longer than necessary, before he turned toward the door, his men falling into step behind him without a word. At the threshold, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "You should ask yourself, Clara," he said, "whether the man protecting you today will still consider you valuable once your brother's debt is settled, one way or another. Men like Damien rarely keep things they no longer have use for." The door closed behind him with quiet finality, leaving the room in tense, uncertain silence. I realized my hands were shaking only when I tried to steady them against my sides. "You should not have spoken," Damien said, though his voice carried less anger than I expected, something closer to reluctant admiration threading beneath the reprimand. "He was trying to manipulate me," I said. "I was not going to stand there silently while he pretended to be my rescuer." "No," Damien admitted, "you were not. And that, unfortunately, is exactly why he will not stop pursuing this now. You have made yourself interesting to him, Clara, in ways that go beyond simple leverage against me." The weight of that settled uncomfortably in my chest. What does that mean? "It means Victor Lang has decided he wants you for reasons that no longer have anything to do with your brother's debt," Damien said quietly. "That complicates everything considerably." I sat down heavily on the nearest chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally draining away and leaving exhaustion in its place. This was supposed to be about protecting me from being used as leverage. Now it sounds like I have simply become a different kind of target. "You have," Damien said, his expression grim, "and I need to decide, quickly, how far I am willing to go to ensure that target remains out of his reach permanently." A long silence stretched between us, filled with the quiet ticking of a clock somewhere in the hallway. I studied Damien's face, searching for the calm certainty he had displayed throughout the previous night, and found instead something more troubled, more uncertain than I had yet witnessed from him. "Why does this bother you so much?" I asked. "You barely know me. Yesterday, I was simply a way to send a message to Victor. Why does his interest in me trouble you now?" Damien did not answer immediately. He crossed to the window, staring out at the grounds beyond, his shoulders tense with something he seemed unwilling to name directly. "Because Victor does not simply want things," he said finally. "He collects them, keeps them, and eventually discards them when he grows bored. I have seen what happens to the people he decides he wants, Clara, And I have no intention of allowing that fate to reach you, regardless of how this situation with your brother resolves itself. That sounds like more than simple business protection, I said quietly. He turned to face me fully then, something unguarded flickering briefly across his expression, before he mastered it again into careful neutrality. Perhaps it is, he said. I have not yet decided how much of that I am willing to admit, even to myself. Before I could respond, Iris entered quietly, her expression tight with barely restrained urgency. Mr. Ashford, there is a call. It is Peter Whitfield. He says it is urgent, and he refuses to speak with anyone, except Clara directly. My stomach dropped. Let me speak with him. Damien hesitated only a moment before nodding to Iris, who passed the phone into my trembling hands. My brother's voice came through immediately, breathless and frightened, entirely unlike the confident, careless tone I remembered from our last conversation weeks earlier. Clara, thank God. Are you safe? I heard what happened at the party. I heard Victor's people were asking questions this morning. I did not think Ashford would actually— Peter, I interrupted, my voice shaking with a mixture of relief and fury. Did you offer me to Damien Ashford to settle your debt? Silence stretched across the line, damning in its length. Clara, I can explain. Did you, or did you not offer your own sister as payment for money you gambled away? I demanded, my voice rising despite Damien's earlier warnings about caution. I panicked, Peter said, his voice cracking. Ashford was going to ruin me, Clara. Ruin everything. And I thought if I could just buy some time, find a way to pay him back properly, I could fix this before it ever actually affected you. You do not get to decide what happens to me to fix your own mistakes, I said, tears burning unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. I know, Peter said quietly, I know, and I am sorry, but Clara, listen to me. You need to be careful. Victor Lang came to see me this morning too. He offered to erase my entire debt, no conditions, if I would simply confirm to his associates that our arrangement with him predates anything with Ashford. My blood ran cold. What did you tell him? Nothing yet, Peter said. I told him I needed time to think. But Clara, he was not asking politely. He made it very clear what would happen to both of us if I refused him entirely. I looked up at Damien, who was watching me with sharp, focused attention, clearly following enough of the conversation to understand its weight. Peter, I said carefully, do not sign anything, do not confirm anything, until I speak with you again in person. Do you understand me? Clara, I am scared, Peter admitted, his voice small and young in a way it had not sounded since we were children. I do not know how to get out of this without hurting one of you. We will figure it out, I said, though I had no idea if that was true. Just do not do anything Victor asks until I contact you again. The call ended, and I handed the phone back to Iris with hands that would not quite stop trembling. Damien watched me carefully, his expression unreadable once more, though something in his eyes suggested he had reached a decision during the brief conversation. Victor is applying pressure from every direction simultaneously, Damien said. Your brother, this house, even the rumors already spreading through the city about last night. He intends to force a resolution quickly, before I have time to consolidate my position. What do we do? I asked. We stop reacting to his moves, Damien said, and start making our own. Something in his tone had shifted, the careful control from the previous night replaced by something sharper, more decisive. Whatever calculation had been unfolding behind his eyes throughout the morning's confrontation, it seemed he had finally arrived at a conclusion he intended to act upon. What does that mean? I asked. Damien moved to a small desk near the window and retrieved a folder thick with papers, setting it down on the table between us. Victor believes his strength lies in patience and pressure. He waits until his opponents make mistakes, then exploits them before they can recover. It has worked for him for years, because most people he targets do not understand the difference between defending themselves and defeating him. And you do understand that difference? I have spent a long time studying it, Damien said, opening the folder to reveal documents I could not fully read from where I sat. Victor's organization looks powerful from the outside, but it depends heavily on partnerships he has never bothered to secure properly. He assumes loyalty, where he has only ever purchased convenience. You think you can turn his own allies against him? I think, Damien said carefully, that several of his partners have been quietly unhappy for months, and simply lacked a reason significant enough to act on that unhappiness. What happened last night, and what happened this morning in that room, gives me exactly the kind of visible conflict I need to approach them. I considered this, turning the strategy over slowly in my mind. You want to use me again, I said. Not as a shield this time, but as proof that Victor is willing to overstep, to threaten things that are not his to threaten. Something in Damien's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine surprise at how quickly I had followed his reasoning. Yes, he admitted. Exactly that, though I would understand entirely if you refused to be used that way twice in 2 days. Would you ask my permission this time? I said, unable to keep a trace of sharpness from my voice, remembering how the previous night had unfolded without any warning at all. I am asking now, Damien said quietly. That is the difference between last night and today. Last night, I acted because I saw no other option in the time available. Today, I have time enough to ask you properly, and I intend to use it. I studied him for a long moment, searching for the calculation I expected to find beneath his words, and found instead something closer to sincerity, uncomfortable and unfamiliar on his features. What exactly would you need me to do? Several of Victor's partners will attend a private dinner 2 nights from now, held at a restaurant considered neutral ground for men in our position, Damien explained. If you were present, willingly, at my side, it would demonstrate publicly that Victor's aggressive approach this morning failed entirely, that his pressure produced nothing except a stronger alliance between us. And if it does not work? I asked. If Victor simply escalates further, the way he threatened this morning, then we will have lost nothing we did not already risk, by doing nothing at all, Damien said. Passivity has never been safety, Clara. Not in this world. Victor is already moving. The only question remaining is whether we move to meet him, or wait until he arrives on his own terms. I thought of Peter's frightened voice on the phone, the desperation in his admission that he did not know how to escape the situation without hurting one of us. I thought of Victor's cold, calculating gaze sliding over me in that reception room, the unsettling gentleness in his voice as he tried to pry me away from Damien's protection with false concern. I will do it, I said finally. Not because I trust you completely, and not because I have forgiven what happened last night, but because I understand now that hiding from this will not make it disappear. Something eased slightly in Damien's shoulders, a tension I had not fully noticed until it began to release. Thank you, he said, and for the first time since I had met him, the words sounded entirely genuine, stripped of calculation or strategy. Do not thank me yet, I said. Thank me once Victor Lang is no longer a threat to either of us. Damien almost smiled at that, a brief, unguarded expression that transformed his face into something younger, less burdened by the weight he clearly carried every single day. Fair enough, he said. Rest today, Clara. Tomorrow, we begin preparing properly for what comes next. As he gathered his papers and moved to leave the room, I found myself watching him with an attention that surprised me, searching for the coldness I had expected to find in a man capable of commanding fear from an entire party with a single gesture. Instead, I found someone carrying burdens quietly, calculating constantly, protecting people in ways that rarely looked gentle from the outside, but seemed, increasingly, to come from somewhere more complicated than simple business interest. I did not know yet whether that realization frightened me or reassured me. Perhaps, I thought, it did both at once. What does that mean? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. It means tomorrow. Victor Lang is going to learn exactly how much he underestimated both of us, Damien said, and by the time he understands his mistake, it will already be too late for him to correct it. The restaurant Damien chose sat on the top floor of a building overlooking the river, its windows framing the city lights like a painting no one inside seemed to notice anymore. I wore a dress Iris had brought that afternoon, deep green and simple, nothing like the diamonds and silk I remembered from the party. Damien had insisted on simplicity deliberately. Tonight is not about spectacle, he told me while we waited for the car. Tonight is about certainty. Let Victor's people wonder why you no longer need to prove anything. The dinner had barely begun when I first noticed the man watching us from a corner table, nursing a drink he never seemed to finish, his eyes tracking every movement Damien made with unsettling precision. I recognized him vaguely from the party, one of the men who had stood near Victor throughout the confrontation that morning. "He is not one of Victor's partners," I said quietly, leaning toward Damien. "He does not belong at this dinner." Damien's eyes flicked briefly toward the corner table, before returning to me, his expression giving nothing away. "No," he agreed. "He does not." "Then why is he here?" "To watch," Damien said, "and likely to report back everything he sees tonight." He raised his glass slightly, a casual gesture that somehow carried a clear message across the room. "Smile, Clara. Let him report exactly what I want Victor to hear." The evening unfolded with careful, deliberate performance, conversations flowing between Damien and Victor's partners, with a warmth that felt entirely genuine from the outside, though I understood now how much calculation lived beneath every smile and handshake. I played my part as instructed, engaging in polite conversation, laughing at the appropriate moments, allowing myself to appear exactly as comfortable and secure as Damien needed Victor's spies to witness. It was working. I could see it in the subtle shifts among the men at our table, the way their initial wariness softened into something closer to acceptance, the way one particularly influential partner, an older man named Edmund Gray, leaned toward Damien near the end of the meal, with quiet, private words I was not meant to hear. "Victor overstepped this morning," Edmund said, his voice low. "Threatening a woman, under another man's protection, in his own home, no less. It has left several of us uncomfortable with the direction he has been pushing us toward." "I appreciate your honesty, Edmund," Damien said carefully. "Do not appreciate it too quickly," Edmund warned. "I am not offering loyalty tonight. I am simply telling you that Victor's patience appears to be running out faster than his judgment, and that concerns men who have built careful, quiet lives around avoiding exactly that kind of recklessness." The conversation shifted before I could hear more, but the seed had clearly been planted. Damien's plan, whatever its final shape, seemed to be taking root exactly as he intended. We were nearly finished with the evening, when everything changed. A commotion near the entrance drew every eye in the restaurant, and I turned just in time to see Victor Lang himself striding through the doors, uninvited, his expression carrying none of the careful control he had displayed that morning. Something had shifted in him, something sharper and more desperate than the calculated menace I had witnessed before. "Damien," Victor called across the room, ignoring the tension rippling through his own partners at the sight of him. "I believe we have unfinished business." Damien rose slowly, his posture radiating calm authority even as the restaurant fell into uneasy silence around us. "Victor, this is a private dinner. You were not invited." "I did not require an invitation to protect my interests," Victor said, closing the distance between us with quick, agitated steps. His eyes landed on me, sharper now, stripped of the false gentleness he had used that morning. "You brought her here to make me look foolish in front of my own partners." "You made yourself look foolish this morning," Damien said evenly, "by threatening a woman in my home. I am simply allowing your partners to see the consequences of that decision unfold naturally." Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded flash across his features, the mask of composed menace slipping to reveal something closer to genuine fear beneath. "You do not understand the position you have placed me in," Victor said, his voice dropping lower, meant only for Damien and myself, though I suspected Edmund Gray and the others were straining to hear regardless. "I made promises to people above me, Damien. Promises involving her brother's debt, promises I cannot simply walk away from without consequences I am not prepared to face." "Then perhaps you should have chosen your promises more carefully," Damien said, "before making them at the expense of people who owed you nothing." "This is not only about Peter Whitfield's debt anymore," Victor said, his gaze flicking toward me with something almost desperate. "There are people watching this situation who expected resolution weeks ago. If I return to them empty-handed tonight, having lost both the debt and any influence over the woman herself, the consequences will not stop with me." I felt a chill settle over me at the implication buried in his words. "What people?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "Who are you talking about?" Victor's eyes met mine directly for the first time that evening, something almost pleading beneath the desperation. "You do not understand what you have walked into, Clara. This was never simply about Damien and myself. Your brother's debt was purchased from someone else entirely, someone who wanted a reason to move against Damien's territory for months before any of this began. I was simply the instrument they chose to create that opportunity. The restaurant had gone completely silent now, every guest and staff member frozen, watching the confrontation unfold with the same paralyzed attention I remembered from the party days earlier. "Who purchased the debt, Victor?" Damien asked, his voice carrying a new, dangerous edge I had not heard before. Victor hesitated, glancing around the room as though calculating how much exposure he could survive by answering honestly. "Nathaniel Cross," he said finally, the name dropping into the silence like a stone into still water. Something shifted visibly across Damien's expression, surprise and grim understanding replacing his earlier calm. "Cross has been trying to move into this city for years," he said quietly. I did not realize he had finally found a way to attempt it directly. "He financed the entire arrangement," Victor said. "The debt, the pressure on Peter Whitfield, even the timing of tonight's meeting. I was simply meant to secure Clara as leverage and hand the entire situation over to him once it was resolved. Instead, you claimed her before I could act, and now Cross believes I have failed him entirely." "And what happens," Damien asked slowly, "if you have failed him?" Victor's silence answered more clearly than words could have. Whatever fate awaited him for failing Nathaniel Cross, it was severe enough that even standing here, exposed and humiliated in front of his own partners, seemed preferable to facing it directly. I watched something calculating pass behind Damien's eyes, the same careful strategy I had witnessed the previous day when he explained his plan for tonight's dinner. Whatever he was thinking, it was already moving several steps beyond the confrontation happening in front of us. "Edmund," Damien said, turning toward the older man who had spoken to him earlier, "did you know Nathaniel Cross was behind this arrangement?" Edmund's expression hardened. "No," he said firmly. "And I do not appreciate learning that Victor has been working with someone attempting to destabilize territory that affects all of our interests, not simply yours." Murmurs rippled through the other partners at the table. Uneasy glances exchanged as the full implication of Victor's admission settled over the room. Whatever fragile alliance Victor had built to challenge Damien's position, it was unraveling rapidly in real time, the very partners he had hoped to secure now recoiling from association with an outside threat like Cross. "This changes everything," Damien said quietly, though his voice carried clearly across the silent room. "Victor, you came here tonight hoping to reclaim leverage you had already lost. Instead, you have handed me something far more valuable. Confirmation that Nathaniel Cross is moving against territory that belongs to every person sitting at this table, not simply mine." Victor's face had gone pale, the desperation in his eyes deepening into something closer to panic. "Damien, please. Whatever happens between us, Cross cannot learn that I revealed his involvement tonight. He will not simply punish me for failure. He will consider this a betrayal." "That," Damien said, his voice cold and final, "should have concerned you before you decided to threaten Clara Whitfield in my own home." I stood beside Damien, watching Victor's carefully constructed world collapse around him in real time, and felt a strange, unsettling mixture of vindication and unease. Whatever satisfaction I found in watching him face consequences for his actions, the mention of Nathaniel Cross had introduced a danger far larger than anything I had understood until this exact moment. Peter's debt, Victor's desperation, even the elaborate display at the party days earlier, all of it now felt like the opening moves of a conflict that extended far beyond the boundaries I had assumed contained it. Somewhere beyond this restaurant, a man neither Damien nor I had ever directly confronted was already calculating his next move, and I understood, with a cold certainty settling deep in my chest, that tonight's confrontation had only revealed the smallest fraction of the danger still waiting ahead of us. Victor left without another word, his men trailing behind him in stunned, uneasy silence, leaving the restaurant in a state of quiet, simmering shock. The remaining partners at our table exchanged glances heavy with unspoken calculation, each of them clearly recalculating their own position in light of what had just been revealed. Edmund Gray was the first to break the silence, turning to Damien with an expression far more serious than the guarded caution he had offered earlier in the evening. "You need to understand something, Damien. If Nathaniel Cross is truly behind this, he will not simply retreat because Victor's plan collapsed publicly tonight. Men like Cross treat setbacks as information, not defeat. I am aware of that, Damien said. Then you also understand that the rest of us cannot afford to remain neutral much longer, Edmund continued. If Cross intends to expand into this city, he will not stop at pressuring Victor. He will approach all of us eventually, offering partnership or threatening consequences, depending on which persuades us faster. What are you proposing? Damien asked. Nothing formal, not yet, Edmund said carefully. But I would rather stand beside someone who handles pressure the way you handled it tonight than align myself with a man like Cross before I understand the full scope of his ambitions. He glanced briefly toward me before returning his attention to Damien. You should know, several of us have grown tired of Victor's recklessness long before tonight. This simply confirmed what many of us already suspected. The other partners at the table nodded slowly, murmurs of quiet agreement passing between them. I watched the subtle realignment happening in real time, alliances shifting almost invisibly beneath the surface of polite conversation, exactly as Damien had predicted when he first explained his strategy for the evening. Once the remaining guests departed, and the restaurant staff began quietly clearing the tables around us, Damien finally turned to me, his earlier composure giving way to something more tired, more human than I had yet witnessed from him. You did well tonight, he said quietly. I did not do anything, I said. I sat here and watched everyone else decide the shape of my life for me, exactly the way Victor accused you of doing this morning. That is not entirely true, Damien said. Your presence, calm and unwavering despite Victor's confrontation, gave Edmund and the others something concrete to measure against Victor's desperation. Sometimes influence looks like silence held at exactly the right moment, rather than words spoken loudly. I considered that, uncertain whether it reassured me or simply reframed my helplessness into something more palatable. What happens with Nathaniel Cross now? Damien's expression darkened slightly. Cross does not operate the way Victor does. Victor relies on intimidation and slow pressure. Cross prefers precision, patience, and timing. If he financed this entire situation with your brother's debt as the opening move, he has likely already prepared several contingencies for exactly this outcome. Meaning he expected Victor might fail. Meaning he probably intended for Victor to fail eventually, regardless of what happened tonight, Damien said. Victor was never his primary tool, Clara. He was simply the most expendable one, sent forward first to test how I would respond, before Cross reveals his actual intentions. The implications settled heavily over me. Then this is not over. No, Damien admitted. If anything, tonight was only the opening chapter of something considerably larger. Cross will not appreciate learning that his arrangement with Victor collapsed so visibly, in front of witnesses, who now understand exactly what he was attempting to do. What does that mean for Peter? I asked, fear tightening in my chest at the thought of my brother caught once again between forces far larger than himself. It means we need to move him somewhere safer, immediately, Damien said. If Cross financed this operation from the beginning, he may still consider Peter valuable, either as continued leverage or simply as a loose end. He prefers eliminated, before this situation grows any more complicated. The words settled cold and sharp in my chest. You think Peter is in danger tonight? Right now? I think we should not wait to find out, Damien said, already reaching for his phone, his earlier calm replaced by brisk, focused urgency. Iris will meet us at the car. We are leaving now, Clara, and we are bringing your brother somewhere secure, before Cross has time to react to what happened here tonight. I rose quickly, my heart hammering with a fear sharper than anything Victor's confrontation had produced, understanding now that whatever fragile safety we had built over the past 2 days remained entirely conditional, subject to collapse the moment a man neither of us had yet met decided to make his next move. Peter's apartment door stood open when we arrived, swinging slightly on its hinges in the cold night air, and my heart stopped completely at the sight of it. Stay behind me, Damien said, his voice low and sharp, all traces of the calm strategist from the restaurant, replaced by something harder, more alert. 2 of his men moved ahead of us into the apartment, weapons drawn, their movements economical and practiced in a way that made my stomach twist with new fear. Clear, one of them called after a tense, silent minute. I pushed past Damien before he could stop me, rushing into the apartment to find it in disarray. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, and emptied onto the floor. Peter was gone. "No," I whispered, my hands pressing against my mouth. "No, no, this cannot be happening." Damien moved through the apartment with quick, focused efficiency, examining details I would never have noticed myself. "This was not random," he said. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were searching for, and they were not gentle about finding it." "Where is he?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Where is my brother?" Before Damien could answer, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He answered immediately, his expression tightening as he listened to whoever spoke on the other end. When he lowered the phone, his face had gone carefully, deliberately blank, the expression I now recognized as the mask he wore when delivering news he knew would hurt. "They have him," Damien said quietly. "Cross's people took Peter approximately 40 minutes ago. They want to trade him for you." The room seemed to tilt around me. "Then we trade. I will go, right now, if it means Peter comes home safely." "No," Damien said firmly, gripping my shoulders with a strength that startled me out of my rising panic. "Clara, listen to me carefully. If Cross wanted your brother dead, he would already be dead. He is being kept alive specifically because Cross wants leverage, and leverage only holds value while the person remains breathing. The moment you walk into whatever meeting he proposes, both of you become expendable." "I do not care about the risk to myself," I said. "He is my brother." This entire situation began because I refused to see how much danger he was already in before any of this started. "I understand," Damien said, his voice gentler now, though the firmness beneath it remained unshaken. "But running directly into Cross's trap will not save Peter. It will simply hand him exactly what he wants, without any guarantee he honors whatever agreement he proposes." I forced myself to breathe, to think past the panic clawing at my chest. "Then what do we do?" "We use the position I built tonight," Damien said. "Edmund Gray and the other partners already understand that Cross is attempting to destabilize territory belonging to all of them, not simply mine. If I can convince them to move against Cross collectively, rather than allowing him to isolate his targets one at a time, we change the entire balance of this confrontation." "That will take time we do not have," I said. "Peter needs help now." "Then we buy time," Damien said, "by giving Cross exactly enough hope that his plan is working to delay whatever he intends to do to Peter, while I move the pieces necessary to end this permanently." He called Edmund directly, his voice calm and commanding despite the late hour, explaining the situation with careful, deliberate precision. I listened, understanding fragments of the conversation, watching Damien navigate a negotiation far more delicate than anything I had witnessed at the restaurant hours earlier. When he finally lowered the phone, something had shifted in his posture. A decision made and settled. "Edmund has agreed to meet with the other partners tonight," Damien said. "If I can present evidence that Cross financed Victor's entire operation against Peter and against you, evidence I already have thanks to tonight's confrontation, they will have no choice but to consider Cross a shared threat rather than simply my problem. And if they refuse?" "Then we handle this alone," Damien said, "but I do not believe they will refuse. Cross has made himself too visible tonight, and men like Edmund did not survive this long by ignoring threats, simply because they arrived at someone else's doorstep first." The following hours passed in tense, fractured pieces, Damien coordinating quietly with Edmund and the other partners, while I sat frozen with fear for my brother, unable to focus on anything except the image of Peter, frightened and alone, wherever Cross's people had taken him. Near dawn, Damien received the call he had been waiting for. "They have agreed," he said, relief evident beneath his careful composure. "Edmund has convinced the others that allowing Cross to succeed here sets a precedent none of them can afford. We move against him together, this morning, before he has time to consolidate whatever advantage he believes he has gained." "What does that mean for Peter?" I asked. "It means we no longer negotiate from weakness," Damien said. "Cross believes he is dealing with two isolated targets, myself and your brother. Instead, he is about to discover he has united an entire coalition against him, simply by trying to divide us." We arrived at the location Cross had specified for the exchange, just as the sun began rising over the city, casting long shadows across an abandoned industrial building near the river. Damien's men fanned out silently around the perimeter, joined now by additional forces from Edmund and the other partners, a visible display of unified strength that seemed to catch Cross's people entirely by surprise as we approached. Nathaniel Cross himself stood waiting near the entrance, a tall, composed man whose calm exterior did nothing to disguise the sharp calculation constantly moving behind his eyes. Beside him, Peter stood pale and shaken but unharmed, his wrists bound loosely, his eyes widening with desperate relief the moment he saw me. "Clara," Cross said, his voice smooth and unbothered despite the obvious shift in numbers surrounding him. "I confess, I did not expect quite this level of response to a simple family matter." "There is nothing simple about kidnapping someone, Mr. Cross," Damien said, stepping forward with the same commanding presence I had witnessed throughout the previous days. "A temporary measure," Cross said dismissively, "necessary only because Victor proved incapable of resolving this situation through more conventional means." His eyes flicked toward the gathered partners standing visibly beside Damien, understanding, settling slowly across his features. "It seems, however, that I underestimated how quickly you could organize opposition against me." "You underestimated several things," Edmund Gray said, stepping forward alongside Damien, "including how little patience the rest of us have for outsiders attempting to destabilize territory we have spent years building carefully." Cross studied the assembled group for a long, calculating moment, clearly recalculating whatever strategy he had prepared for this confrontation. "It appears," he said finally, "that continuing this particular venture would prove considerably more costly than the potential reward justifies." "Release Peter Whitfield," Damien said, "and consider this matter concluded, provided you withdraw entirely from this city and abandon any further interest in territory that does not belong to you." A tense silence stretched between them, Cross weighing his diminished options against the assembled strength surrounding him. Finally, with a slight, controlled nod, he gestured toward the men holding Peter, who released him immediately, allowing my brother to stumble forward into my waiting arms. "This is not forgiveness," Cross said, addressing Damien directly, as Peter collapsed against me, shaking with relief and exhaustion. "Simply a recognition that the cost of continuing has exceeded whatever value remained in pursuing it. Do not mistake retreat for surrender, Damien. I do not forget setbacks easily." "Understood," Damien said evenly, "though I would advise choosing your future ventures more carefully than this one." Cross departed with his remaining men, leaving the industrial building and the tension it had held moments earlier, dissolving slowly into the quiet gray light of early morning. I held Peter tightly, tears finally breaking free after days of forced composure, relief and exhaustion overwhelming me completely. "I am so sorry," Peter whispered against my shoulder, "for everything, for all of it." "We will talk about that later," I said, though my voice carried more warmth than anger now, the fear of losing him entirely overshadowing whatever betrayal still lingered between us. "Right now, I am simply glad you are safe." Edmund and the other partners dispersed quietly, already discussing among themselves the new alliance forming in the aftermath of Cross's retreat, while Damien stood slightly apart, watching the reunion between myself and my brother with an expression I could not entirely read. Peter pulled back from my embrace enough to look at me properly, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, guilt written plainly across every line of his face. "I kept thinking, while they were holding me," he said quietly, "that I had done this to you. That whatever happened next was entirely my fault, and there was nothing I could do from inside that room to fix it." "You were not the one holding the gun, Peter," I said, though the words came out gentler than I expected, exhaustion softening whatever anger remained. "You made a terrible choice, and we will need to talk honestly about that eventually. But right now, none of that matters as much as knowing you are safe." "I never should have gone to Damien in the first place," Peter admitted. "I should have told you the truth about the debt from the beginning, asked for help honestly, instead of trying to hide the mess I had made until it was too big to manage alone." "Probably," I agreed, "but you are here now, and that is what matters this morning." I glanced toward Damien, who remained a respectful distance away, giving us space for the conversation without withdrawing entirely. "We will figure out the rest later, together, properly this time." Peter followed my gaze, studying Damien for a long moment, with an expression that mixed lingering wariness with something closer to grudging gratitude. He came for me, Peter said quietly, almost to himself. After everything I did, after offering you to him like some kind of payment, he still came. He did, I said simply. Why? Peter asked, though something in his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. I did not have a complete response yet, not one I felt ready to voice fully, so I simply squeezed my brother's hand and guided him toward the car, waiting to take him somewhere safe, promising myself that whatever conversation needed to happen between Peter and myself, it could wait until the exhaustion of the morning had properly passed. The drive back to the townhouse felt different from every previous journey through this city. The tension that had gripped me constantly since the night of the party finally, gradually loosening its hold. Peter slept against the window, utterly spent from the ordeal, while Damien sat quietly beside me, his attention seemingly fixed on his phone, though I suspected he was giving me space to process everything that had happened, rather than genuinely absorbed in whatever messages awaited him. Thank you, I said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence between us, for going after him, for not simply accepting the exchange Cross proposed. I told you already, Damien said, glancing up from his phone. I had no intention of letting either of you become expendable to a man like Cross. You risked considerably more than you needed to, I said, involving Edmund, gathering the other partners, moving against Cross directly instead of simply negotiating quietly for Peter's release. That was not the safest option available to you. No, Damien agreed. It was not, but it was the option that ensured Cross understood clearly that targeting you, or your brother, carries consequences he cannot simply absorb and continue operating as though nothing happened. I studied him carefully in the quiet interior of the car, searching once more for the calculation that had defined so much of our early interactions, and finding instead something that felt increasingly like genuine care, however carefully guarded beneath his composed exterior. You did not have to make it personal, I said quietly. You could have handled this purely as strategy, the way you framed everything at the beginning. I could have tried, Damien admitted. I am not certain I would have succeeded. Not after watching you stand your ground against Victor in that reception room. Not after hearing how you spoke to your brother on the phone, refusing to let fear silence you, even when everything around you suggested silence was the safer choice. Something warm settled in my chest at his words, entirely unlike the fear and confusion that had defined my first days in his world. I did not expect any of this, I admitted. Not the danger, and certainly not whatever this has become between us. Neither did I, Damien said. I have spent a long time keeping my life carefully separated from anything resembling attachment, precisely because attachment creates vulnerability in a world like mine. You have made that separation considerably more difficult to maintain. Later that day, once Peter had been settled safely under careful protection, and the immediate danger had finally, truly passed, Damien found me alone on the terrace of his townhouse, staring out over the quiet city that had nearly cost me everything over the past several days. It is over, he said, joining me at the railing. Cross has withdrawn entirely. Victor has lost what remained of his standing among the other partners. Your brother's debt, and everything that came with it, no longer holds any leverage over either of you. And what happens now? I asked quietly. Between us, I mean. Not Peter, not Victor, not Cross. Simply us. Damien was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with the same careful deliberation he brought to every decision I had witnessed since the night he first pulled me onto his lap in front of 200 strangers. I never intended for any of this to become personal, he said finally. It began as protection, as strategy, exactly as I explained to you that first night. But somewhere between then and now, Clara, it stopped being simply strategy for me. I noticed, I said softly. Somewhere between watching you defend my brother despite everything he did, and watching you risk your own position to save him tonight. What happens now depends entirely on what you want, Damien said, not what circumstances have forced upon you. You are free now, completely, to walk away from this world and return to the life you had before any of this began. I considered that carefully, weighing the ordinary safety of my old life against everything I had discovered about myself over these past several days, the courage I had not known I possessed, the strange, complicated understanding that had grown between myself and the man standing beside me now. I do not think I want the life I had before, I said finally. Not entirely. Too much has changed, and I suspect I have changed along with it. Something shifted in Damien's expression, careful hope replacing the guarded uncertainty he had carried throughout our conversation. And what do you want instead? I turned to face him fully, the city spread out golden and quiet beneath the morning light. The danger that had shadowed us for days finally, genuinely dissolved. I want to choose this, I said, not because circumstances forced me into your lap at a party, or because my brother's mistakes left me no other option. I want to choose you, deliberately, the way you chose to protect me from the very beginning, even when it cost you far more than you expected. Damien reached for my hand, his fingers closing around mine, with a gentleness entirely different from the firm, deliberate grip that had first pulled me onto his lap days earlier. Then choose carefully, Clara, he said quietly, because I do not intend to let you go easily, now that I have finally allowed myself to want you freely, rather than simply protecting you out of necessity. I smiled, genuine and unguarded for the first time since that terrifying, transformative night at the party, understanding finally that whatever danger had brought us together, something far stronger than fear had grown quietly between us in its place. The city continued its steady hum below us, indifferent to the quiet, hard-won peace, settling finally over the life I had once believed was ordinary, now transformed entirely into something I could never have imagined choosing for myself, until the moment everything changed.